the email, but she should be able to log in. Ah, she's here. Okay, wonderful. All right. Okay, we're going to start. All right. Welcome, everybody. And that's what I wanted. Okay, so welcome to this webinar series that started yesterday. So this series explores the close relationship between data flows and international trade, and how data policies such as privacy or cybersecurity can influence the cross-border flow of data and in turn international trade. And for that purpose, we think that it's important to start with the description of the mechanics of data flow. That is, how does data flow from one server to another flow when companies conduct their activities? So this is what we will do today. So today's webinar will present concrete examples of how data flow from one point to another when companies conduct their activities. We have 4 speakers with us today and volunteers who have agreed to share their business experience with us. I will let you know that, 2 speakers and volunteers, I will let you know 1 minute before the end of your presentation so that we can wrap up. We are tight in terms of time, and I kindly ask you to respect this allocated time so that the audience can have a fair and reasonable time for asking questions and receiving answers. Please note that this webinar is recorded, and the recording of this webinar, in addition to the presentations of the speakers, will be available on the WTO website, and the URL is now in the chat box. You, the audience, can ask your questions in the chat box at any time, and we will have 30 minutes of questions and answers at the end. Any question or intervention you make is not considered as the official position of your government. Then let's start. One of the questions we ask ourselves is how data influences global value chains and supply chain management. We have 2 speakers with us today to provide insights in that respect. Let's start with you, Magnus. Magnus, you're a former senior advisor at the Swedish National Board of Trade, and you wrote several reports. 2 really struck my interest. The first one highlights the use of data flows and data by manufacturers. And the second one is on the 4th industrial evolution. Magnus, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this seminar. So I'm going to speak about this report that I wrote about moving data in the manufacturing field.
Yes.
The majority of all trade that happens during the production of goods and services, all the inputs and the intermediaries that goes in there. So you have to understand this when you talk about data transfer. So let's get the next slide, please. I mean, this quote from the study is basically what we're talking about. I interviewed a person at the manufacturing firm, and he said that for us, data wanders in all directions, all the time, all over the world. And that's basically manufacturing. You're moving information around alongside all the goods and intermediate goods and services that you move along. So with that in mind, please move forward. So there are basically 5 reasons why you need to move data or information when you're producing goods and services. First of all, you need to exercise control and coordinate your production. You can have spread out production, you have different units in different orders, you're in contact with subcontractors, you have to talk to your customers and all those issues. The second is about R&D, testing and developing new products and services. Also can take place in-house or out. As subcontractors, you can have a R&D unit in another country. You're interacting with your customers, you're using social media data to develop products and so forth. All about moving information. And then ensure supply chain management, getting the products from point A to point B without hiccups. We'll hear more about that, I think, in later presentations. The 4th reason is to manage the actual production. Is all the data that's produced on the manufacturing floor, and you have the sensors they're registering, and you have production in different countries, and you have an orchestration of what's happening between different units all over the world. Again, a lot of information moving around, making the actual manufacturing happening. And the last reason, basically the fifth reason, is about to run and monitor sold goods. And I think this is very important to understand also, that your relationship with your customer doesn't stop when you have sold a product to that person. You know, you monitor use, you get feedback how it works, you can update and upgrade products that you sold, and all again, it's about moving information between your company and the customer and getting information back. Can I have the next slide, please? But it gets very, you know, you talk about data, and it's a term and it's hard to grasp, and that's why we developed this graph. It's hard for you to see here, but you can have a look at the slides afterwards, or look in the report that I wrote. This is just examples of what kind of information are we talking about. I mean, this is really what we're talking about when we talk about sending data. We're talking about all this kind of information that you need, all the communication, all the information you need to produce your goods and sell it, and have the interaction with the customers and so forth. So I think this is very valuable to get, you know, to give data a face, if you want. So data and moving data around between different units and different countries is very essential, or necessary, if you wanted to produce things. I mean, the title of my study is No Transfer, No Production. I mean, if you stop the transfer, you stop the productions of goods and services. And that's pretty clear. Now, what kind of data? Well, you have it here, but you can break it up in two different parts. You can have the personal data and the non-personal data. And we talk about legislation. You usually tend to talk about restriction on personal data. But that, in fact, is just a small minority of all the data that is produced. Most of the data produced during production and afterwards is non-personal data. But the legislation usually covers personal data. Not all legislation, but a lot of times legislation that hinders movement of data focuses on personal information, personal data. And those legal barriers put restrictions on companies. I'm going to get to that soon and show you how that affects global value chain, how it affects production. But it's important to understand, can we have the next slide, please? That personal information gets into the process in all these parts of the production. So for all the reasons that I talked about, the control, the pre-production, R&D phase, the logistic phase, the production phase, and what happened afterwards, you can always see that personal data is part of that data collection or that data pool, if you want. So even on the production floor, you will have monitor registering specific workers what they do. And what happened is that you get a really large amount of data registering what happened on the production floor, but there are bits of personal data in there. And now this becomes a problem for companies because, you have laws that might hinder you what you can do with this data. So they might be they need to work around that. And many times also it's just the fear that might be personal data in the data set that hinders companies from moving that data. So if you can have the next slide, please. So here you see really what happens on the ground. So we know that data is very essential for producing goods. It's very essential for global value chains to function, and for businesses to have interconnect with each other and work together. And now we have legal restrictions. One of them are so-called forced localization requirements, that you have to store information in a certain country. And that has a real effect on companies and their global value chains. So as you see on the side there, companies due to this kind of restriction can't monitor their products or support remotely. They can't move all the data they want to a GVC partner, or they can't store data in a location where they want to store it. So they have to work around this, and that can be different ways. And see in the middle part there, sometimes they have to choose another value chain partner to work with. So it can happen that a European company can't work with a subcontractor, even though it's the best subcontractor in, let's say, South Africa, because they're afraid that there are restrictions on how they can move the data. So they will look for someone else, not as good, but someone they can move the data to. So that will have an effect on the GVC setup. They'd have to work with different partners, maybe have to, instead of working with one partner, working with different partners all over the world. So they have to work with, they can't do it as effectively as they want to. The other alternative is that they wash the data set or try to store data in different locations, which they can do, but that's many times very costly. So that will increase cost and other inefficiencies. So what we see here is that going back then, that data, of course, is very important, as explained, for producing goods and services. You have to move it around, but different laws or even can have effects on the companies, which will not stop production, but it will make it less efficient and raises the cost for companies. Next slide, please. Again, this is the same thing, but this time we based it on cross-border data transfer restrictions. You have the same kind of effect there. On the one side, you can see what happens to the company that if they have face restriction on cross-border data transfer, usually personal data.
You have 1
minute. And that if they, pardon?
You have 1 more minute, sorry.
Okay, or if they're afraid that there might be so. And you can see again here, if you look through this chart here, that again, we end up with a situation that they have to use different global value chain partners, or they get increased cost and inefficiencies. Next slide, please. So that was very fast to explain the situation today. And then we have the situation tomorrow, of course, that we are moving into a much more digitalized world. Digital solution and digital technology is coming very fast. And all about that is about moving data. So if you read the first report, you have to think that that was yesterday, and the world is very different today. And it's going to be very different tomorrow with a lot of more data that has to be moved to be able to produce goods and services. And there I stop, and I hope that was 10 minutes exactly.
Almost, but yes. Thank you so much, Magnus. Rosie, now you have the floor.
Thank you.
So wait, Rosie is our expert at the WTO working on transport and logistics services. Rosie, you have the floor now.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for inviting me to this webinar. My role is to talk about the case of data flows in transport and logistics services. This sector, I think people rarely associate with digitalization and data flows, because transport and logistics services require physical delivery. Okay, so usually people do not associate with today's digitalization and data flows, but actually I want to argue that digitalization now is transforming the entire sector, and which makes a strong case for data flows. I think if we, if we don't fix our look at the final stage, delivery stage, and then we look at the entire supply chain, we will find that digitalization is transforming the whole the sector. To look at the supply chain, we will see that from the vehicle ship design to infrastructure, transportation, operation, intermediary services and supporting services, maintenance, repair, and information sharing. We have seen that the sector or the activities in the sector now tend to more and more data-driven, and the cloud-based digital platforms enable innovations, new business models, and then data now has become the center of the sector. Okay, I think in order to understand cross-border data flows, the role of data in the sector, before I give some specific examples, I think it's important to understand some common features of the trends. And I think, first of all, we have seen higher level of automation. We have seen autonomous vehicles and very quickly autonomous even ships. And then thanks to Internet of Things, now we have seen better and broader connectivity, not just between vehicles, ships, but also between infrastructure and vehicles, ships, and digital technologies, especially Internet of Things, cloud computing, big data analytics, and automation AI. Now they are widely deployed in the sector. Digital platforms becomes a main business model. And more now, I mentioned that this data-driven approach dominant, not only for business but also for regulators. And also very important, we have seen a very interesting data synergies between this sector and other sectors. And this sector, of course, relies on the support of ICT services, but also it boosts ICT services and also other services like construction, engineering, energy, environment, and a lot of business services. Very quickly, some examples to show you that how data is transferred or moved in the sector. For example, in road transport, now with the big data analytics, Internet of Things, now this huge amount of data on the second or minute basis streams to the platform called Intelligent Transport System. And this platform, the system can do the real-time monitoring on the vehicles and the roads. And then we know, we are familiar with Uber taxi services, but in road transport, the Uber Freight is also becomes very popular. It's digital load matching platform which connect carriers and the shippers. Okay, so you can download the app to your smartphone, and then if you want to move your goods, you can find the nearest trucker to move your goods by using the best route. Okay. Similarly, in maritime transport, we have seen online booking, online cargo management, tracking and tracing shipment, and also optimized routes for shipping lines. And then this is to show you that we have seen the 7 digital trends in shipping, in container shipping sector, which interrupt in 4 aspects, from planning, operation, commercialization to supporting functions. This is one specific example. It's blockchain-enabled digital container logistic platform, jointly launched by Maersk and IBM in December 2018. In less than 2 years, okay, this platform now on the weekly basis, it processes more than 15 million information on more than 15 container information. It connects, the entire ecosystem. Now, more than 150 members joined the platform, consisting of, ports, terminals, authorities, custom authorities, and also, of course, ocean shipping lines. Okay, it replaces this traditional paper-based manual information sharing system. Okay, and then even in the rail transport, we have seen the 3-layer network from signaling system to train operation and the network have been digitized. And then this is one example to show you, this is a platform launched and operated by Siemens, okay? It collects data from the rail and train, and then provide analysis, and then this platform can predict potential breakdown, and then plan in advance, much in advance of repair and maintenance. And then so this is has largely increased the security of the rail network system. Okay, so this is a really data-driven service. And then the data, they are all cloud-based and in the platform. And then in the urban system, is very also similar. Data, huge amount of data generated on every second. And then this data, provides a possibility to address chronic urban transport problems. And one, I think, and not just to help us to address chronic urban transport problems, but also it enables innovations, okay? One example is called Mobility as a Service. It's also a digital platform. It bundles service providers, not just public service providers, but also private cars, okay? Taxis, cars, or even parking, the urban parkings. Combine all this, okay, with users, and then the bridge is called the Mobility Service Provider. It's a digital platform, okay, and then so this is a service launched in 2017 in Helsinki and Finland, and then this model or this service now is being is sort of exploited also in other cities, okay. So this is another interesting example is in logistics services. I think it's probably the most profound transformation in this sector is in logistics services. We have seen in the last few years more than 400 startups, enter logistic markets. These tech startups, they started with freight forwarding digital platform, okay, to match suppliers and consumers. And what is very interesting is that, for example, this example, the digital platform Flexport launched in 2013. And in a few years, very quickly, it has developed from a digital platform into a full-fledged logistics service provider. Now it engages into an ocean, air, rail, road transport, freight forwarding, warehousing, and all customer services, as well as financial and insurance services. All these services all are supported by this digital platform. Okay, and then so this is very and this Flexport now has become a very important player in this sector. Okay. So, yeah, I want to sum up, okay? Data is at the center of the transport and services. You will see that from automation platform to information sharing and smart transport infrastructure. Data is at the center, okay? And on the second basis, okay, second or minute basis, huge amount of data is being generated and move around, okay? And then so this is a sector where it really is now is become more and more data driven and with important policy implications. And I think it's very important that, I want to conclude that as someone said, this sector, okay, probably in the future, data will create more value than traditional transport and logistics services. More value will be created by data. Okay, and I will stop there. And yeah, thank you.
Rosie, I appreciate that you keep the 10 minutes, and we will come back to the policy implications in the Q&A period, likely. All right, before closing the chapter on global value chains and supply chain management, I'd like to give the floor to two volunteers who agreed to share their business experience. First, we have Joe from the Business Software Alliance. Joe, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. Great. I'd like to begin by thanking the WTO Secretariat for organizing this event, and it is a real honor to be on a panel with so many distinguished and knowledgeable panelists. So I'm here on behalf of PSA, which is a trade association of enterprise software producers and cloud service providers, as well as the Global Data Alliance, which is a cross-sectoral association of companies that depend on cross-border data flows to do business. Those companies are in all sectors, from agriculture to manufacturing to financial services. So I'd like to cover three issues today. What is enterprise software? What is the cloud, and how is it relevant to data flows? And then to provide some case studies and examples. So enterprise software provides tools for a range of business functions, from billing and financial transactions to research and development, product design, to customer management, market forecasting, business intelligence, inventory control, industrial systems management, many of the topics that Magnus referred to in his presentation early on as well. Business software is not just the domain of companies with international operations, but it is also essential to companies of all sizes across the spectrum. These tools help businesses innovate, they help businesses invest and create jobs, and promote productivity, workplace safety, and environmental efficiency, and regulatory compliance. So then the second question, or the second topic, was, what is the cloud and how is it relevant in the data flow context? So the cloud, as everyone knows, is a distributed architecture of servers, often located regionally or in central locations, where data is stored, but also where software tools are stored, and which can be accessed across borders by companies wherever they happen to be. Cloud-enabled business software provides a number of advantages over on-premises or on-location software in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of network latency, in terms of cost and efficiency as well. Data flows. Today, we live in a globalized economy where every business that you're interacting with is using business software, and in all likelihood, it's housed in the cloud. So in many countries, that may mean that it's housed in a neighboring or a regional data center outside of the specific jurisdiction that you find yourself in. Data flows in this context are necessary. To access business software tools, one needs to access them in the cloud, and that often implies a cross-border data transfer. Data flows are also enhancing of business operations, and so that will be a situation in which one is relying on data analytics, and I'll give an example in a minute. Data flows enhance the effectiveness of your operations. So the example I'd like to provide is in financial fraud detection, and I'm sure that's an example many of you are familiar with, excuse me.
Yeah.
Financial fraud detection requires monitoring, sophisticated monitoring of data sets around the world in real time. Historical payment transaction information and multi-country data sets to identify anomalies and trends, to see where a transaction may be fraudulent, and then can be responded to in real time. And it's clear how the smaller the data set, if it's just one region or one country, the less effective and less representative the ability of the company to respond to an identified financial fraud will be. So then I'd like to close with just a few examples, and I'd like to ask Kian if you could post the flow chart.
Yeah, let's share that in the chat box. You can go on.
Great. So just to provide a few examples, and Magnus alluded to a number of these already, in the R&D context, multinational teams collaborate across borders to develop products, to develop new solutions. In the market forecasting context, artificial intelligence tools, data analytics can be used with data around the world to identify patterns that can help predict market demand, customer design preferences, risk factors relevant to particular investment decisions. For purposes of safety and productivity, and a lot of this is in the industrial systems and industrial cloud context, real-time analytics of data gathered from sensors that are embedded within machinery, embedded in facilities, can alert operators to hazards or breakdowns before they occur, allowing for predictive maintenance, allowing for a safer operation of your facilities. In terms of regulatory compliance, product approvals in any number of countries require data from across jurisdictions and require that data to be transferred for those products to be brought to market on a timely basis. Sales, thank you. In the context of sales and invoicing, the relevance of data is clear, supply chain and post-sale service as well. So I'd like to close with those comments. And again, thank you all for the invitation to speak today.
Thank you, Joe. I'm pressuring all of you, sorry for that. Esther, so Esther is from the AT&T, the company that is a broadband connectivity provider, as well as a content provider using software. So Esther, you have the floor.
Thank you to the WTO as well for the opportunity today. I am Esther Pei. I am based in Singapore, and I'm responsible for regulatory affairs, external affairs in the Asia Pacific. And I think those in Geneva, and advance Jeune Genevois to you tomorrow. I just wanted to pick up on the theme of global value chains, which speakers before me had touched upon. I think what we're seeing with cross-border data flows really is that it enhances and makes more efficient existing supply chains, as well as potentially create new ones. And we at AT&T observe these from our enterprise customers, which span over 3 million globally, from small businesses to nearly all the Fortune 1000. And they exist in a wide variety of sectors. And I thought it would be useful to just consider the amount of data traffic that is carried across borders today. The AT&T global network today carries more than 350.9 petabytes of data traffic on an average day. And to really just give a sense of magnitude, 1 petabyte is 1 million gigabyte, and that is a lot of data. And that is growing. I think with COVID-19, we've seen traffic on our network increase by over 25% as more and more people and businesses rely on digital services. And just to go back to global value chains, I think I would highlight that the Internet of Things technology, or IoT technology, really has enabled manufacturing companies to improve almost every aspect of their business operations. And here, let's take our automobile manufacturing customers, for example. I think many of them serve global markets and have facilities in multiple markets. And with IoT technology, the sensors or devices embedded in manufacturing assets, or even in automobiles themselves, that captures data on the entire life cycle of the automobile, and from its manufacture all the way till after-sales care. And I think Magnus had touched upon this whole life cycle kind of idea in his presentation earlier. I'll just highlight a couple of examples in the automobile manufacturing sector. I think connected sensors can help to identify, for example, the location of a faulty manufacturing asset, and that would trigger a service request for an in-market engineer. What it can also do is it can trigger a command to shift production to another factory, be it in-market or even to a nearby market. And that really opens up options to the manufacturer. What we're also seeing with IoT technology is that it enables manufacturers to track things like energy efficiency, and that makes manufacturing processes more sustainable and climate friendly. And really it is the flow of data that underpins and enables these efficiencies. The data that is captured, linked to central servers, it enables manufacturers to compile, analyze and query that data, diagnose the issues and make optimal business decisions. And I think the crux here really is in real time. And I think Rosie touched on this critical in real time element in her presentation. And I think I'll just conclude by saying that if this wealth of data is siloed on a market level, then that data set is less complete, making it less effective and less actionable for the manufacturers. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Esther, and thank you for all the previous speakers. With this, we close the chapter on global value chains and supply chain management. And now we turn on to the second chapter, which is online platforms and the reliance on data flows. For this topic, we will have one speaker and a few volunteers. Wendy, you are with us, I believe. So Wendy will be discussing about online platforms, three of them. Wendy, she's a researcher at the US Bureau of Economic Analysis of the US Department of Commerce. Wendy, you have the floor now.
Okay. So thanks to WTO webinar team for organizing this exciting webinar series and giving me this opportunity to share my work on value of data and online platforms. As the world is entering the era of 5G and AIoT, the combined forces of AI and big data are redefining how the goods and services are produced and distributed. Online platforms based on AI and big data operate globally and in near real time. Their seamless global supply chain operation allow them to allocate resources more efficiently than traditional multinational firms. Online platforms have caused creative disruption in the industry that they enter, and the disruption has pushed existing firms to digitally transform their organizations and business models. That is, in the era of the global data economy, firms at all sizes increasingly rely on data and data flows to conduct their business domestically and internationally. Companies perform a series of value-added activity to create value from data. In general, the data value chain contains 4 stages: data collection, data storage, data analytics, and data-driven business model. The final stage is the data-driven business model, which includes business plans that guide the firm to use and monetize data. For example, what type of data to collect and how to use data to produce digital goods and services. The 4 stages do not contribute to the creation of value of data equally. If companies cannot license the use of data and do not have the capability of providing data targeting services, data itself may not contain much value. Data collection and storage generate only small amounts of value, and much greater value are created when a firm has a data-driven business model. In other words, a company can make some profit by licensing the use of data, but having a data-driven business model can bring the most return. My recent paper on Levator data that you can find on the web describes an example of an online flight search to explain the data value chain with the concept of vertical integration. And I won't repeat here in the interest of time. But in general, unlike big techs, small and medium-sized firms may only focus on 1 or 2 sectors of the data value chain. Here, we can focus on using this data value chain to help you understand data flows and trade. First, because it could take about $1 billion to build a data center, firms in some developing countries may rely on cloud services located in other countries, which will naturally increase the cross-border data flow. Data centers alone or data flows alone do not represent much value of data. For example, Google currently has 2 data centers in Taiwan to support its operation in Asia. One of them supports Google services of over 4 million apps to Asian countries. This means that there are many cross-border data flows between Taiwan and other countries, but Taiwan may not receive most of the benefits. Second, as shown in the data value chain, in the digital era, that we can outsource many things like data analytics to work to cloud service companies and it doesn't require a firm to have a knowledge in advanced AI tools. The core and most highly value-added activities is to have a data-driven business model. Even local entrepreneurs in developing countries can create successful ventures because they have a comparative advantage in understanding the local unserved demand or the crucial problems faced by local consumers and business. One example is Kudo in Indonesia. This indigenous e-commerce platform also attracts overseas third-party sellers to sell goods on its platform. This part of business activity relies on cross-border data flow. Let's now see how online platforms rely on cross-border data flow to conduct business. Online platforms can differ in their underlying business model, which determine what type of data they collect, how data flow, how they monetize the data, and what consumers get from exchanging their data. OECD defines online platform as digital services that facilitate interaction between two or more distinct but interdependent sets of users who interact through the services via the internet. Today, I'm showing you 3 types of online platform companies and focus on the areas related to data and data flow. And you can find other types of online platform in my paper on value of data. The first example is the Amazon Marketplace, an e-commerce online platform facilitating the transaction.
Wendy?
Yes?
Wendy, I'm getting people commenting that they can't see your slides. Could you press share?
I can personally see Wendy's slides.
A number of people are commenting they can't.
And a number of people as well can see the slides. So I guess it's a technical issue for specific persons. Wendy, I think you can go on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
So, so the first example is the Amazon Marketplace, an e-commerce online platform facilitating the transaction between consumers and third-party sellers. Amazon is currently the largest e-commerce platform in the West, and it also serves some Asian countries. In terms of data flow, Amazon collects data from its worldwide customers and conducts data analytics to provide data targeting services to third-party sellers. Amazon has one of the most sophisticated logistics support systems worldwide to support its global e-commerce activities, which requires a lot of cross-border data flows. The second example is Booking.com, a leading online travel sharing platform facilitating the sales between consumers and property owners. In terms of data flow, Booking.com collects data from worldwide consumers and conduct data analytics to provide third-party sellers with data targeting services. Dominant online platforms are multinational firms, but can be highly concentrated their operation in few countries. Most of highly value-added work can now be carried out in one location or within a nation due to the zero transportation cost of digital goods and services and the scalability of online platform. As of 2017, Booking.com has 28.9 million listed properties in almost 138,000 destinations in 229 countries. But most operations are conducted in its Amsterdam headquarters, where it hires 1,800 engineers that account for 90% of its employees. It heavily relies on cross-border data flow to produce and deliver their digital goods and services. The company outsources its data centers and benefits from the cheap cloud computing services. This business strategy makes it physical asset light, but extremely profitable. The third example is Ant Group, China's largest online financial platform facilitating financial transactions among financial institutions, merchants, and consumers. It is also the world's largest unicorn. Today, there are 1 billion active users globally, and the majority of them are in China. However, its main digital payment business, Alipay, has members from more than 110 countries and regions. It is one of the 2 main mobile payment methods that Chinese tourists use when they travel abroad. The payment transaction relies on cross-border data flows. So from these examples, we understand the basic business model under each type of online platforms and associated data activities. The flowchart shows how online platform companies create value data. In general, online platform companies collect data from users and third parties and use 2 ways to monetize the data. One way is to license the use of data to other companies, such as data analytics firms. Examples include Twitter. Moreover, in China, there are several active public data markets, but first they are allowed to trade needs Chinese government's approval. The other way is to provide data targeting services to clients, such as third-party sellers. This option requires technical skills in data analytics and subject matter expert to produce a data-driven business plan for data targeting services that can produce revenue for the firm. So depending on its combined in-house capabilities, an online platform company can offer a variety of data targeting services that produce revenue. Even within the same type of online platforms, company can vary by the type of data targeting services they offer.
You have 1 more minute.
So I'd like to conclude with this plot in my new study that has solved the measurement conundrum of linking the explosive global data flow to the value of data. The plot compares the explosive global data flow and the combined value of data measured by organizational capital for 7 leading global online platform and internet companies for the period of 2001 to 2017. These companies includes Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, and Alibaba, and Tencent. The orange line is the combined value data for these leading companies, and the blue line is the global data flow. You can see that the 2 time series follow each other very well. The similar close pattern between the global data flow and the big tech's combined value data imply that in the digital era, big tech companies have been aggressively invest in data-driven business model to grasp the great economic opportunities from the explosive global data growth, especially when companies can capture the majority of the value of data through their data-driven business models. I will end my talk here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate it. Thank you for the presentation. Okay, I'd like to invite 2 volunteers who agreed to share a business experience, Pablo and Paul. So Pablo is the data protection officer of Mercado Libre. Mercado Libre is, if not the largest, one of the largest e-commerce platforms in Latin America. Pablo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kian, and thanks the WTO for the invitation to present here. Are you seeing my slide? Okay. Are you?
Yes.
Can you see my presentation? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm Pablo Segura. I'm Data Protection Officer for Mercado Libre. That phrase that it's there, I want to say that is the motto of our company. By no way is a reference to my presentation. The best is coming. And so Mercado Libre is a company that develops fintech and e-commerce solutions. We provide services to 18 countries in Latin America, have operations in 8, and have more than 15,000 employees. We have one of the largest e-commerce sites in the world and one of the most used applications in Latin America. We have an active base of 38 million buyers and 11 million sellers, and more than 1 million items sold every day. And we operate the largest digital wallet in the region with more than 3 million active payers. So, as you can imagine, the data is one of our more important assets. We process, for instance, contact information and identity validation of our users, device identification, geolocalization, payment methods, and credit rating and behaviors and preference, among other data. And we use that data for providing our services and to enhance and provide a personalized experience to our user and to offer them products and new services. We also use data to comply with legal obligations like anti-money laundering, and to detect and prevent fraud, and to provide a secure environment to our customers and to implement cybersecurity actions. We process data by traditional means, but we also use machine learning techniques to detect frauds in real time. As Joe has previously said, it is very important for this matter to rely on cross-border data transfer to enhance our models. So it is very important here, and we rely heavily on data flows. Also, we use machine learning techniques to enhance our cybersecurity and for the credit rating of our customers in order to provide them with tailor-made credit solutions. For doing all this, we rely heavily on cross-border data flows between our companies and with commercial allies and service providers. In order to manage the information, we have developed a strong governance and data protection program to create value through the responsible use of data and to foster public trust. So that was what I want to share with you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Pablo. The pleasure is ours. Paul, you will have the floor. Let me just introduce you. You're the Chief Commercial Officer of an electronic payment provider, Commerce-Gate. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you for the opportunity, WTO and everybody. So, Chief Commercial Officer of Commerce-Gate. Commerce-Gate are a licensed payment institution by the Bank of Spain, and we need to comply to regulatory requirements, European standards for KYC, know your customer, money laundering, and due diligence. So what we do, we offer payment facilities for Visa and MasterCard and other cards globally to merchants. They can be, some examples, Nestle, Aldi, Zara, Tesco's. We've mentioned Booking.com, we've mentioned Uber. They are merchants. They want to take Visa and MasterCard for the card holders' payments. So we, as the financial institution, recruit them as merchants to the European standards of due diligence, and then we can enable them to facilitate the payments for their consumers. So behind the scenes, obviously Uber and every other company wants to understand if those customers are real, they're not fraudulent, and they understand and they do their KYC checks. So we are the enabler to access all companies the ability to take payments online. Now, for us to do that, there's a value chain. The card holder needs to link with the merchant, and I've said we use Tesco's maybe as an example. We are the enabler and recruit them and link them up to the acquiring banks in the background, which are your banks who have issued your cards where you make the payments from. Then the transaction goes through various stages in milliseconds to get an authorization back to the merchant to say the card isn't lost or stolen. Now, in between that process, there's a data flow. And this data flow, which I move on to the next screen, the data flow is required to enable not only the bank to ensure that the authorization has enough money on the account and the card holder is valid, that we have to step in and use third parties to enable clear, concise risk scores to understand and prevent fraud for that card transaction. So when we all pay with our Visa, MasterCards, JCB, any card around the world, in between that millisecond you get a yes or a no, there are many, many data flows going on to third parties which enable us to check if that data is real. And those checks can be from pure fraud to customer identity, to know your customer and due diligence checks, and age verification checks. So we need to do that as a business, and all payment businesses need to do that to a very high standard to comply to the licensing criteria that we are as a payment institution. And then lastly, one point I will make is you need to add more value within that to ensure that the whole process is seamless to both consumers and the merchants. And we add now on the competitive side to enable clear, concise identification of fraud and the defence of that fraud with chargeback, dashboards and outsourced customer service and reporting and reconciliation. So my key draw away and conclusion on this is that data flows in this global ecosystem of payments cannot survive unless we are all enabling cross-border sharing of information of those data flows to mitigate possible fraud and customer services enablement. So that's my conclusion. Thank you
so much, Paul. To that, we close this chapter and we turn to the last one, which is data considered as an economic asset. As you know, it's often said that data has become an economic asset. And one question that arises is how companies strategically manage their data and infrastructure, and how does these management decisions, of course, involve data flows. We have one speaker with us, Cedric Lee, who is one of the managers of a growing and international company located in 14 countries. And the company provides consulting services to other companies to help them manage strategically their data and make the best commercial use out of this data. Cedric, you have the floor now.
Hey Ken, thanks for the invite. So in order to talk about data flows for companies today, I'm going to translate the case into two different types of data flows. So first, internal data flows within the global blue chip company, which has foothold in more than 40 countries, and also the other aspect would be focusing on data partnerships between different global companies as well, and focusing mainly on one country. So I'm going to focus in terms of use case, digital marketing activation, but I could talk about a lot about other data use cases. But for the sake of this webinar, I'm going to focus only on the digital marketing value chain of the data. So first, when assessing the value chain of the digital data for marketing purposes, you have four main steps. You have the data collection phase, the storage and the processing, the activation, and the measurement. So first, going into the collection, you have, for instance, local subsidiaries which have their own tools or not. They might have the same, they might have different ones. And based on their location, they will have different data centers associated with the tool. So for instance, Google Analytics data, which collects all the online data for the manufacturer, will be located in Belgium. Whereas for Romania, for instance, the same Google Analytics data will fall into the Netherlands data center. So first we have data collection. So in a very simplified way, I have shown here only 2 countries and 2 types of tools. But as you can suspect, for a blue chip company, we have like more than 10 tools and more than 40 countries. So the online data and the CRM data coming from Salesforce will be stored and processed into the European headquarters data lake, which is located in the UK. So the cloud provider will be Azure, and all the different data use cases and data valorization will be done here. So for instance, building a 360 customer view, because we have, for instance, multiple views coming from multiple tools, and you need to have this aggregated view in order to run, for instance, some machine learning use cases, such as churn scoring, loyalty scoring, or any product recommendation algorithm that you want to run. Okay, so once you have this data collection, then this data is enriched. You need to send it for activation purposes. So in order to activate, for instance, you can send it to Google marketing platforms in order to operate paid media display or search campaigns, or on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, or to Adobe Campaign, which is a marketing automation tool in order to send emails. So as you can see, depending also on the country, even though it's the same tool stack, the data centers might be a little bit different. So here we'll talk only about 2 countries, but we have already more than 4 countries in terms of data flow transfers. Okay. So once the campaigns has been and the audiences has been activated, there's going to be measurement, obviously. So for instance, the global headquarters will be located in Korea, and all the campaign performance and all the data collection coming from the tools will also be poured into a Google Cloud platform where all the data coming from all countries will fall into this big data bucket, so this data lake. And the main use of this data lake is mainly for data visualization purposes, so dashboarding and reporting purposes, because obviously when you are headquarters, and especially when you're a current company, you want to monitor and pilot your activity at a global level. So as you can see, you have two main challenges and two main points of concentration of the data depending on the use case. So first, you need to aggregate and evaluate your data in one place by merging all the data that you have from one country, but you can also do it for dashboarding purposes. So obviously, for the data science part of it, the best way to value it is to centralize it in one data lake in order to make economies of scale. So I won't go through it because it's quite straightforward actually. Just checking the time. Okay, so I talked about the internal data flows within the global company. Now I want to introduce the external data flows between partner companies. So we also supply services for companies who want to exchange or sell their data to another partner in their value chain. Okay, so first, sorry. So for instance, you will have first-party data coming from a partner, first-party data, which are all the data that are owned by the company, whether it's personal, non-personal data. And you also have first-party data from partner B. And the objective is to find the common clients and prospects from A and B in order to target them with a specific marketing campaign, if it's the case of a digital marketing campaign, or to find some new insights that you don't have in silo using your own data. Okay, so basically what you want to have is one partner which is complementary in your market value chain. So in order to illustrate the data flows in a very simple way, please note that is only one kind of use case and only one kind of technical way to share the data between those two partners. So for instance, the data would be shared locally. Shared locally because it doesn't make sense to, at least for the moment, for companies to share data from one country with for instance, a telco operator located in Spain. It doesn't bring that much value because you don't have those common clients between partner A and partner B, okay? So as illustrated, even though you have both companies located in the same country, the tool stack might be different. The tool stack might be different, meaning that the data centers and the data collection would be done in different places. So as mentioned, Belgium for Google Analytics and Ireland for Adobe Analytics. And we're talking about the same data, which is the online data. So one way to share this data is that they create their own segments of, for instance, people who have visited page A or page B, and the same for the telco operator, and they will be sending those audiences into a Facebook account or Instagram account, which will be, for instance, handled by Artifact, a third-party provider, or any account managed by either actor A or actor B, and they will operate co-branded campaign on social media where they're going to present, for instance, one phone combined with a mobile plan coming from this telco operator. So as mentioned, you have, just to sum up, you have internal flows between a global company, which needs to have some economies of scale in order to value their data, because thanks to machine learning, you have an increasing rate of return of data. So the more data you have, the even more value you can get from it. And the second case is about mainly exchanging data with a partner in order to get data that you don't have yourself in silo. So that's it for me, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Cedric, very much. So with that, we closes our speakers' presentations, and I would like now to turn to the audience and to receive your questions. Lee Tuthill, I believe that you've been following the chat box. Can you make us a summary of the different questions being raised? Lee, you have the floor.
Yes, I have a number of interesting questions to add to the ones that were, in fact, I understand, submitted in advance, which you will also be looking at. We do have a lot of of material that my good friend Richard has posted, and you are free to read this. He has very legitimate, but perhaps copious comments. But I will go through the actual questions. We have one about the data. I'm looking at my notes here. That the data mentioned by a lot of the speakers was privately appropriated, is the wording. And the questioner is wondering if the governance of data sets, not just of internet governance, but if the governance of data sets could include a concept like the global commons that might actually lead to more equity amongst, and again, you get some sense of people concerned about competition issues. So if some kind of a global commons for data could be applied to some of the privately collected data. There's another question that I think relates to fragmentation of supply chains. And the participant is wondering, can be any kind of architecture created that would encourage cross collaboration and could potentially trade agreements look at this? We have a question about that good data frameworks, the argument is usually favor digital innovation. And in that sense, the frameworks in developed countries would typically be best suited to their situations and don't necessarily take into account the differing capacities, particularly of developing countries. So that what kind of ideas could perhaps create more equitable distribution of the gains from the value of data that developing countries could then share in. And then I have a question that a couple of simpler questions I'll close with. One person wondered how accurate and useful data analytics really is, and with the implication that a lot of the statistics, presumably about the benefits, are self-reported by the software companies themselves. Is it true that they're accurate and useful as the vendors of data analytics would have us believe? And I might just make a personal note. I know recently there was some analysis was performed on UK end-of-year exams, which students weren't able to take, to estimate what might have been their results. And some of the assumptions made in the data analytics that did this failed a lot of kids who thought they were going to pass. And so there were problems with the data analytics applied. So that does happen. How useful are they to your companies? Or if you do them, how do you ensure they're useful to companies? Finally, we do have one question here about that Wendy was suggested to address, that the US Clean Network Initiative, and there's a link on the question, what impact would this have on businesses that happen to use Chinese platforms? And finally, I had a small question for Mr. Barclay myself, and it's pretty simple. In a typical transaction that they perform within their financial sort of system, how many different countries would normally be involved in the data flows that he was describing?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let me jump on the first one, which is about inclusiveness. Here I might have like sub questions, and the first one would be maybe for Rosie and Cedric, and other speakers can jump in as well. The first one is, how can small and medium enterprises also benefit from this use of data? Maybe Cedric, you might know the challenges for MSMEs, small and medium enterprises, to harness data. Let me just finish the question, and then I pass you the floor. Maybe for Rosie, in the transport and logistic sectors, which regions, geographical regions, are leading, and why those that are not struggle to digitalize their operations? And then, of course, if you can address the audience question about the capacities for developing countries, what kind of support can be provided to countries so that they can also harness the data. So Cedric, Rosie, you can have, I pass you the floor, and then other speakers, you are free as well to intervene. Cedric?
Yeah. So just to answer your question for smaller companies, and to also answer one of the questions regarding the value of data analytics, and the answer is yes, it does have value. And specifically, that's my advice for smaller companies, is think data from the beginning, okay? Because you might not have some, it might not be a priority when you're launching a small business or you're trying to scale your organization, but you need to have data from the get-go. You need to think data from the get-go. How can it be translated? It can be translated by having very clean data sets. So for instance, if you have one data set with CRM recordings about your sales, make sure that all your sales representatives do feel the same naming convention, that everything in the data set, every columns are very well furnished, etc. And to quickly finish on the data analytics part, that's where all the difference is going to be to make the data analytics valuable or not. How qualitative have you been into collecting the data, and how consistent have you been on it? So there's the volume part, obviously, but the qualitative part is also a very important aspect of it. So my main recommendation, think data from the beginning.
From the beginning. Thank you very much. Rosie? Rosie?
Could you please repeat your question? I didn't get your question.
Yes. If you look at the different geographical regions, to what extent they have digitalized the transport and logistic sectors, which regions are leading and which ones are not, and what are the challenges for those that are not leading or struggling to harness the value of data? What are the challenges they face?
Yeah, in the transport and logistic sector, the leading area or region definitely is United States and Europe. That's a leading area. And then, for example, the vehicles, the main vehicle manufacturers are in Europe. Okay, and then so they now make best use of data. You know, they collect data from all over the world, from their consumers all over the world, and then so that's I think that creates sort of an advantage for them to develop data analytics and also other platforms. To just very briefly to mention, because there's one question I noticed in the chat box about data localization. I think it's one example is Sweden. I think is a heavy vehicle manufacturer. They once mentioned that for example, in China, they require data localized in China, and then they have encountered a problem to get data from their customers in China, and then to intervene, in a timely manner, because they cannot get data cross-border back to their platform. So they have to create a data center in China in order to process data. So this is one example happened in transport sector. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Magnus, we've mentioned Sweden. Do you want to add a few words maybe and to react to the two questions on the inclusiveness?
Sorry?
I was talking with Magnus.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Those are very hard questions, I think. I think it's hard to answer. That's my boring approach. I mean, these are many times private firms doing their private business. So I think from the start, we should be very careful with trying to, force them to hand over data in any way. If that was the way I understood the questions or the underlying idea behind the question. I mean, we're working quite a lot trying to both in Europe and Sweden with data sharing and data pooling regulation, encouraging companies and governments to collaborate and share data and build on each other's experiences. So my answer, my boring answer is that I mean, we should use tools that encourage exchanges of data, and that way work towards spreading data and getting more access to data.
That's a good point. I mean, this also related to competition issues and the access to and the sharing of data. We will have actually a webinar on this specific topic in December to talk about competition issues and sharing of data. Joe, you told me that you have a few words as well to react to the two questions.
Absolutely. Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on Magnus's comments. I think those are exactly right. Frameworks for the voluntary sharing of data are very important. There's also a great deal of untapped potential in government data. And there are a number of steps that can be taken to kind of unleash and the potential of that data. That could include having governments look at what government data assets exist that would be useful for academic researchers, for the public, for industry. What data assets does the government have that, or do governments have that are being underutilized? Ways that those government data assets could be made available for research and development. Ways in real time for government agencies to use technologies to provide access to data in real time, and looking at kind of new standardized data collection, data governance, data licensing practices. So I think it's a very good question and a very timely one. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Paul, I think you had like a direct question for you. You can, if you want, take the floor to answer it.
And the question, what was that?
Lee, do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, it was basically in a typical transaction data flows that you described for your work. How many countries would be involved?
Okay, there's a couple of aspects and answers to that. So just to give you an idea, so card payments are enabled by those card schemes: Visa, MasterCard, Amex, JCB, Diners, all the cards you can think of. So those cards are issued in 181 countries around the world. So that's point number one. So we can process those consumers' payments from anywhere around the world where those cards are issued. So that's point number one. Point number two, then once those cards are facilitated in, all of our commerce gate technology is compliant, secure, and it's in the cloud, as people have said about. And that's based in 3 disaster recovery locations, US, and 2 locations in Europe. So that's another aspect of the answer. And then also then with the data flows and the checking of the fraud and the KYC, those data providers that check fraud, velocity, customer identification, those companies are based in several different US and European locations as well. So the payment ecosystem, we are based and regulated in Spain. That's CommerceGate as a business. But all of a sudden you see that the ecosystem that we support is global. The network is absolutely global. Everyone's involved.
Great, thanks, Paul. Yeah, there was something that I've learned by organizing this webinar is companies sometimes want to have a copy in different servers so that they strengthen the resilience. Just saying what I've learned. Wendy, you had as well a question about the US Clean Initiative.
Thanks, Kia. So because I'm not a privacy expert, so I will pass the question related to Clean Network initiatives. But however, I would like to give some comment to the two questions that you shared with before the webinar. The first one is what happened to the small medium-sized firms in the developing countries. So I would like to emphasize that the cross-border data flow is really important for trade, especially for those small, medium-sized firms in the developing country, because they can utilize the online platform company to enter the international markets with a much lower transaction cost than before. The second is cross-border data flow is also not only important for the drug development, for example, like a rare disease, but it's also important for other disease. For example, there's a Sweden-based Hermes Medical Solutions company. They actually rely on cross-border data flow to monitor organ functions of patients. And all the data are stored in Sweden, but the service covers more than 40 countries. So yes, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Esther, I think you want to say as well a few words.
Yes, thanks very much. I thought to just respond to two questions that Lee had picked up on in the chat. The first one relates to the question on whether there is a role for trade agreements in addressing fragmentation, and I think absolutely yes. I mean, we look to a couple of trade agreements that are already existing, for example, the CPTPP, USMCA, US-Japan Digital Trade Agreement, and I think also Singapore Digital Economy Agreements, and Singapore just signed one with Australia last month. And all of these trade agreements help and facilitate cross-border data flows. For example, there is a prohibition of data localization. I think beyond trade agreements, also look into trade initiatives or arrangements, right? For example, Singapore is working on this initiative with, I think it's New Zealand, on electronic SPS certification. Underpinning all of these initiatives, arrangements, really is that flow of data that will help companies, small businesses, agriculture producers, in the case of Singapore and New Zealand with the ESPS certification, that really helps these companies expand their market reach. And it's really a positive step towards avoiding fragmentation. And whilst I have the floor, I thought to also just respond, I think, to another question that Lee had raised in the chat, which is how do we then build this inclusive digital framework? And I think the key to it is really conversations and adopting that collaborative approach. I think there is tremendous benefits for governments when they collaborate with one another, as well as with their stakeholders, then that includes businesses, to craft that inclusive, and I would add a dynamic governance for cross-border data flows. Thanks.
Thanks, Esther. Okay, let's go on this question that was about the accuracy of data and the quality of data. I think, Cedric, you may say a few words on that. And we also received in advance a question that was interesting. It was the following: has the digitalization of the global economy given you a competitive edge or made competition more difficult in your sector?
That's a very interesting question. I'm going to focus first on the second one, and basically it's both, right? So meaning that everybody do have the ability to collect data, but that's the case for everybody. So for me, data collection is one thing which is critical and something that everybody should do. The one of the maybe competitive edge that you can gain, and that's something that I wanted to address earlier, but I have forgot actually, is talent. So that's why my first recommendation is maybe data collection, data quality, but also recruit the talent that will give you the competitive edge over the other companies, because that's a very fair comment that data is now available for everybody, but how you process this data, and this can be done mainly through talent, and not only obviously because now everybody do use the same library of codes available from Stack Overflow, made available from Facebook, etc. But having smart people using it and knowing how to use it will give you this competitive edge. And sorry, what was the first question? Sorry, I forgot.
The quality of data.
And what do you want to know about the quality of data?
The fact that if companies or individuals report themselves the data, can we rely on this data? So that's one aspect of the question. And another one is, of course, the cleanliness of data. Data is messy, it has to be clean so that it can be used.
So about cleanliness, you need, for instance, what we see for global companies, because we mainly serve blue chip companies, is that they do have a lot of data coming from different systems and different data collected. But the cleanliness of it, you need, in order to have a good quality of it, you need to have a global data governance framework of it. So indeed, so it's mapping who is the owner of this data set, who will be the user, and who will be the one maintaining it. So that's what we call a data steward. The data steward will make sure that the data will be qualitative. So it's kind of the data project manager, I would say. And on the first part, I would say I discussed it earlier a little bit, but naming conventions are quite important. So one aspect of the data governance is also having the same data dictionary and the same naming convention. So even you have different systems, even you have different countries, and even you have different sales representatives, you want to have the same data language. So that's something that you should enforce as soon as you are getting too many data sources, too many stakeholders and handling the data, etc.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Anyone wants to jump in on this question of the accuracy of data and also the competitiveness produced by the use of data? I see none. Okay. Okay, we're almost there at the end of the webinar. So I'm going to ask you in a few words. So I'm going to broaden the discussion to the next webinars next month to talk a bit about the policy implications and the policy issues. In a few words, I'd like to know your perspective on what is the most pressing barriers to cross-border data flows. Let's start with Magnus.
The absolutely most pressing barriers is uncertainty. Yes. A lot of companies I talk to in my former and current position talks about uncertainty about the data set that they have, if they're allowed to move it or not, and under which conditions.
Thank you.
I would stop there then. Thank you.
Thank you. Rosie.
I just want to say that data definitely, can contribute to competitiveness or competitive edge of enterprises or industry, and also digital platforms definitely may produce competition problems, I think, but then how to regulate, how to manage that is very challenging, because data-driven, platforms really transform the sector. But then it also enables innovations. And then, I think the regulation has to be balanced, not to kill innovation. Yeah.
Thank you. Joe?
Thank you. I was also going to say legal uncertainty. So let me just rephrase that slightly to say that we're standing at a time when there is a move toward a great deal of focus on data policy globally, ensuring that there's that policy making is built on an understanding of how integral data transfers, digital tools have become and have been for a long time now, and how they function and what their benefits are. I think that, building out that understanding and making sure that kind of the operation of the digital environment is clear is very important. And that's why this seminar and set of webinars that the WTO is hosting is extremely beneficial, because it's so focused on kind of a factual discussion of how data operates in the global economy.
Thank you, Joe. Esther.
And I would just stick to Magnus's very succinct one thing really for us, it's spaghetti bowl of regulations, which leads to that compliance cost as well. Thanks.
It's time for dinner for you in Singapore.
It's supper time. But yes.
Wendy.
Okay, so I just want to address the what gets measured gets managed. So we need to really understand and try to measure, establish methodology, measure value of data and associated activities, so we know what kind of mechanism or impact we are talking about, and then that will help policymakers to deal with various issues related.
No.
She's gone.
Okay, she's gone. Okay, I thought it was
data. Thank you.
Wendy, you just freezed. So maybe you can.
Yeah. Did you hear me?
Yeah, but just the 20 last seconds, we did not.
Oh, okay. I can say it again. So basically, what gets measured get managed. So so I heard we actually today discussed a lot of issues, how to have a data governance framework, or a lot of things about what happened to developing country, how we can include them in the global data economy. But really, we need to really spend time to try to understand and try to measure the value of data and how big the value related to associated different kind of data activities, so the policymaker can have a better tool to try to deal with various kind of issue in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Cedric and Paul, we are running a bit late, but go on briefly, please.
So very quickly myself, I joined the others on the legal aspect. So I'm not talking about regulation, because I do agree that data needs to be regulated. But on the legal aspect, I guess that once we have agreements for all parties, the user, the companies, the data should be easily flowed without any legal, too much legal paperwork, I would say.
Thank you. Paul, go on.
Mine is same as everybody else, but one thing I'd say is about uniformity, the same standards, just in my ecosystem, to enable the consumers, all of us paying, to ensure for the merchant there's no fraud and you are you. We need to integrate into around 30 different providers of data around the world to ensure that one check for one consumer is correct. That's crazy. So the uniformity of regulation, the same standards that are required globally, and how that is facilitated in a regulatory environment, that's something that will make everything easier.
Amen. Amen to that.
All right. I think a big thank you to our speakers and volunteers for this very rich and insightful discussion. So we will provide a summary of this discussion on the WTO website, as well as the recording of this webinar, and of course, the presentations of our speakers. So I'll see you next month for the next webinar.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.